When I was a kid, my dad was a pastor, so I spent a lot of time in an empty church building while he was working in the office. And sometimes I would end up sitting alone in the sanctuary. Most of the time that I was there, it was full of people. The organ would be playing, people would be singing in unison, and the echoes of Dad's voice preaching would be bouncing off the walls. But this time it was empty. There was no people there. The parking lot was empty except for one car. All the lights were off, and no one was in that giant room except for me. Being alone in a room that big kind of has a weight to it, it feels like the walls are listening. And I remember this one afternoon whenever I was sitting there in complete silence, just taking it all in, and all of a sudden I heard this click. The air conditioner had just turned off, and only in that exact second did I realize it had been running the entire time. It was this sort of low industrial hum that was covering everything like a blanket. But I hadn't heard it until it stopped. And when it dropped away, paradoxically, the silence only felt louder. This story can give us a little peek behind the curtain and help us realize that no matter where we are, no matter what situation that we're in, there's a sort of universal principle of balance and order that keeps each moment intact. And that means that you're never quite alone. There's always something there with you, pointing you towards what is real. So today I want to talk about that phenomenon. That's something that I call the balancing principle. And it's this idea that all systems in the universe, from atoms to molecules to cells, to your brain to a forest ecosystem, and even galaxies, are all animated by an invisible presence that holds them together in a kind of harmony. So to see what I mean about this, it helps to go back 2,500 years, back to ancient Greece, to the philosopher named Heraclitus. Heraclitus had this idea that things only hold together because of tension. You could call it the unity of opposites. And to illustrate this idea, he used this example of a bow and another example of a simple string instrument called a lyre. It's kind of like an early guitar. He said that a bow only works when the string is pulled tight. If the string is too loose, it's just a stick and a rope. The power comes from the two forces pulling against each other. The same with the lyre, with the guitar. If the string is too loose, there's no sound. If it's too tight, it snaps. So in order for a specific note to be played, the string has to be in perfect tension. From a scientific lens, this is called dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium. It means something steady is steady because the moving parts inside of it are continuously pushing in opposite directions. If that sounds kind of abstract, here's an example. So look at an atom. If you remember your high school physics, you'll recall an atom has a center called the nucleus. And the nucleus has protons, and protons have the same positive charge. You remember, proton is positive. So the same charges push away from each other. Two positive charges push away, like two magnets that won't touch. So with that logic, the nucleus should fly apart too. But the reason that it doesn't is because there's a counteracting force. There's another force called the strong nuclear force, which is sort of like an atomic kind of glue. So inside every atom, you could almost think of an invisible thermostat that equalizes the push trying to push it apart and the pull trying to pull it together. And that principle is the principle I'm talking about. That's the balancing principle. So when those forces stay balanced in the atom holds, and that's how matter can exist. It exists because of the unity of the opposites within. Now let's take that same idea and move upwards into the body. In the body, this is called homeostasis. It means your body keeps itself in a safe range by constantly balancing these small adjustments. Your temperature, your breathing, your water, your energy, all of it. Everything's kept within a range that is the most efficient, and that balancing principle keeps it all in check. For example, if you get an infection, you get a fever, and this is part of your immune response. Your body turns up the heat to help fight the infection. So in the atom, the push and pull keep the matter from falling apart. In the body, the sweating and shivering keep you from getting too hot or cold. That pattern is the same. Anytime we think of a system as stable, it's only stable because it's constantly adjusting. It's the motion that holds it. So now bring it down to your own experience, because that same pattern shows up in the way that you pay attention. Your mind is always balancing two needs at the same time. One need is stability. You need the world to feel steady so you can function. The other need is change. You need to notice what shifts because what changes might matter. So your brain does this thing where it turns down the volume, so to speak, on what stays the same so it can pick up on what changes. Neuroscientists, they call this sensory adaptation. And what's interesting about this is your nervous system literally turns the signal down. Like if a sound stays the same, the receptors in your ears respond less and less, and your brain treats it like a background noise so that you can save energy for anything that changes. And that takes us back to the story about the church and the air conditioner. It's like, why didn't I hear it? I mean, I was right there. It was kind of loud. Well, my brain had sort of filed it away into the steady background folder. So whenever it turned off, that pattern changed and it suddenly came forward again. You can actually test this on yourself right now. So without moving, just bring your attention to your right foot. Like notice where it touches the floor. Notice the pressure in your shoe or the feeling in your sock or the way your toes rest. That feeling was there the whole time. You just weren't paying attention to it because your brain had turned it down in the background. And that raises a bigger question, which is, why doesn't your attention keep snapping back to your foot every few seconds? Why don't you need to constantly keep yourself from being distracted? Well, it's because attention is being organized in a hierarchy. So you're constantly ranking what matters most right now, like what's new, what's useful, what feels urgent, what might be a threat, what connects you to your long-term goals. Whatever ranks highest becomes the thing that you notice, and the rest sort of fades into the back. So before we go any further, let's just pause and clearly describe this thread that I'm trying to run through this whole thing. So there's a kind of order that's built into how reality behaves. Systems keep adjusting, they keep correcting, and they keep finding a balance that kind of holds them together. Heraclitus noticed this a long time ago. He talked about the bow, how it only works because two forces pull each other. The string is what makes the music work when it's held in the right tension. Things hold together when the opposites meet. Now, in the modern day, science uses this same pattern in its own language. Something can look steady on the outside because on the inside it's constantly balancing. You can see this in the atom. Protons should be pushing apart, but there's another force that holds together. You can see this in your body. Your temperature stays within a safe range because you're always adjusting. You can see it in your attention because your brain tunes down what stays the same and highlights what changes. And that's why you probably forgot about your foot until now again. So the point here so far is that across physics, biology, and your everyday experience, life stays together by constantly balancing opposites. And that's what I've been calling the balancing principle. Now, here's where it goes deeper, or maybe you could say more personal. In real life, this principle shows up as a continuous feedback loop. You feel it as positive and negative experience. So let's take something that we're all kind of familiar with, like overeating through the holidays. It starts out as a positive experience. It's fun, it's warm, it's comfort, it's family, it feels good in the moment. That's a positive experience. But if it's taken too far and not kept within a certain kind of balance, then the other side shows up as a negative experience. That means after the holidays, you catch yourself in the mirror. Your pants feel too tight. You feel self-conscious. The negative experience pushes you back into balance because you drifted too far from the positive. So positive experience is only one side of the coin. The positive can't show up without the negative, and the negative can't show up without the positive. So the positive experience of spending time with family and eating a lot of food during the holidays is also, it contains within it the negative experience of looking at yourself in the mirror after gaining weight. It's the same narrative played out on a higher plane of consciousness that sees the whole picture across time. And this goes the other way too. The negative experience of being overweight is also a positive experience of getting yourself back into shape if you see the whole narrative as one unified whole. That's what that balancing principle is always doing. It's showing you that one side does not exist without the other. And that's what this whole idea is about. When you live in a one-sided world, life will keep testing you with the opposite end until you finally answer it and let it change you. A few years ago, I knew I was in this situation where I needed to budget my money. I knew I was avoiding taking action on it because I just didn't want to deal with it. I just kept pushing it off until later. But what's weird was, it was like the more that I kept putting it off and the more I was repressing it like internally, the more my reality updated externally in a way that kept reminding me of my situation. So suddenly all these financial things happened all at once. You have an oil change now, you have new registration, a random bill, something I forgot about, something I didn't plan for. But what's important to note is that it only felt like it was all happening at once. None of these things were technically out of the ordinary. They were all just sort of normal adult life things. But the weird part was how my attention shifted to make it seem like it was all happening at once. And this connects right back to what we were just talking about with sensory adaptation. Your brain turns down what stays the same and turns up changes that matter. So if something threatens your stability, it rises to the top. It becomes the thing that you can't stop noticing. It becomes that theme that you keep running into. So in my case, the more I avoided budgeting, the more everything connected to money started to come forward. So it was like the whole storyline reorganized around the thing that I wouldn't look at. My inner avoidance made my outer problems feel constant, and the outer problems made it harder to keep avoiding. So that's how the balancing principle shows up in real life. The things that keep returning in your life, the same kind of problem, the same kind of tension, the same lesson, that's often that balancing principle pushing you or pushing the opposite end back into your view. It keeps coming back until you see the deeper truth. All of us walk around with a running narrative about how people are, how the world works, what always happens. The trouble starts when you treat that narrative like it's the whole truth. You stop listening. You stop allowing yourself to be wrong. You assume that your way of seeing things is the right way. It's the only way. And this locks you into a one-sided reality. It's a narrative that guarantees you're going to be disconnected from the truth. And a fail-safe way to know that you're doing this or not is to notice if the same core problems keep showing up in your life again and again, with the only change being that it's wearing a different outfit. And that's the moment where you have a choice, because we can spend our whole lives never noticing that we were trapped inside of our own point of view, treating our story just like that's the way that things are. So you blame the person, you blame the timing, you blame the economy, your childhood, your mood, anything outside of yourself. And you can keep doing that until you finally realize you've been living inside of your own story, reacting to life as it hits you instead of stepping back far enough to reflect on it. Because the change was never out there. It's always going to have to start in here, as the cliche goes. And when you do step back, the whole world starts to look different. You start to see your life as feedback. The good and the bad aren't just random moods or random events. They're signals. They're information for you to gather. So instead of blaming everything outside of you, you start building the habit of asking better questions. What is this trying to teach me? What is life trying to balance inside of me? What am I refusing to see that keeps coming back? What's right in front of my face, like the air conditioner, that I keep filtering out? And that's where the balancing principle shows up in a human life. It shows up as the small, still voice that keeps pointing to the same place. The same thing that you keep stepping around. That sentence that you keep avoiding. It's the truth that you keep editing. Because the story that you keep telling yourself is never the whole picture. It shines a spotlight on only one side and it hides the other. And the hidden side doesn't always stay hidden. It comes back as a pattern. It's a familiar kind of moment. It comes back as a familiar kind of internal tension. That's why life seems to work in these repeating cycles. Have you ever noticed that before? It's like the same patterns keep showing up in your life in different forms for some reason. It's not repeating just because it's repeating. It's repeating until you start noticing, until you start to see the cycle for what it is. It's a mirror. It's a reflection. It's a calling to find your way back to what is real.